Hi, David.
Hey, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for your time today. Tell us about your work and your institute.
Well, my name is David Cody. I'm a local permaculture designer and teacher here in San Francisco. One of the teachers at the Urban Permaculture Institute. We teach permaculture, a little bit of the urban style here in San Francisco. We definitely focus on a practical design skill sort of direction with our course. And we do a lot of hands-on and a lot of field trips to various inspiring projects in San Francisco and around the Bay Area.
Nice. What is your training, your educational background for us?
Yeah, interestingly enough, I think I'm a true jack of all trades. I'm a high school dropout. I eventually went to culinary school. I was traveling around as a cook for a long time. I ran my own construction company for a period of time. And when I eventually found permaculture, I started wrapping in all of my passions of food, gardening, building, and things like that, and brought it all together under one unified sort of discipline of permaculture. I think permaculture really what we are is we're specialized at generalists. We're specialized generalists, right? So a little bit of everything, put it all in a pot and stew it together.
Interesting. And tell us a little bit more about how you acquired this property and what you're doing here.
So we're right here on the corner of 18th and Rhode Island, and this is aptly named the 18th and Rhode Island Garden. And the name sort of stuck. The land is owned by a local doctor, and he was very interested in putting it to productive use because he didn't plan to build on it. He read an article that was about some research that Kevin Bayuk, the other teacher at Urban Permaculture Institute, about vacant land. While it's vacant, can we put it towards a productive use? He read that story in the San Francisco Chronicle and contacted Kevin directly.
Wow.
We had a group of students do a design for the garden, and after the design was done, we came in and we worked on the design with the students, developed it a little bit further, and then began implementing in October 2008. So in 2011, October, we'll be here 3 years.
So does the Institute go other places for projects for students, or is it all here?
Well, this is our teaching garden. We also teach in a classroom setting 4 blocks away at the neighborhood house here in Potrero Hill.
Okay.
We also do a number of field trips. So depending on the day's subject, and for example, Water Day, we go look at water on the landscape at McLaren Park here in San Francisco. Or for Earthworks Day, we actually go to the MA Center in Castro Valley, where people like Jeff Lawton and Darren Doherty have worked with permaculture designers to put in a broadacre orchard on contour at Amma's ashram up there at the MA Center.
Wow. Finally, David, talk about the zone concept and if the zone concept is working here at this garden.
Yeah, zones is really an interesting subject in the urban permaculture realms, because we can apply zones to our own selves for our daily movements in life. And our zone 1 might look like, if we happen to be a commuter, our zone 1 would be anywhere along our commute path every day, pretty much. And zone 2 might be our backyard.
Oh,
so,
okay.
because you have to actually go out in the backyard. And then you can apply zones to specific elements in a garden. For me, this garden, the whole thing is, I'd say, zone 2.
Okay.
Zone 2, zone 3 for me. I live about 5 minutes away. I'm here 1 day a week, but I stop in quite often. So in general, the whole site really tends to be a zone, but we can look at any single element on the site and think about its zones, and then start thinking about the relationships of things around it.
Okay, cool. Hey, thanks for your time, David.
Thanks, nice to meet you.
We'll see you up online.
All right, we'll see you there.
All right, ciao. Okay, David, where are we now in the garden?
So we're over here next to the Yacon plants, and this is another one of what we consider San Francisco's plants of interest. These are some plants that we're working with that are, a little bit more rare, more exotic. A lot of people here in the West don't know about them. This is a South American plant, Smolianthus sancifolia. It is the Yacon, and you can see it has this really interesting leaf form. It's an evergreen perennial, and it's a root crop. It's a really amazing root crop. It grows a tuber about the size of a yam, and they have a white flesh, and they're very crunchy. And they can be eaten raw, and it's a lot like jicama when it's eaten raw, very moist and crunchy, but it's a little sweeter than jicama. Actually, it has a little bit more flavor. And that sweetness comes from inulin instead of insulin. So it's a sweetness that diabetics can use, and that can also be juiced and then evaporate the juice, and what we get is Yacon syrup. So now we have a very nice sweetener that is local, grows in San Francisco, doesn't require any shipping or heavy processing and unfair labor practices in other countries. So we have a local product here. If it's sauteed, it's a lot like a water chestnut. It starts to pick up sweetness as it gets cooked. And if it's roasted, say 275, 325 for about 2 hours, it becomes very sweet and caramelizes, and it's almost candy-like. Incredible plant, absolutely one of my favorites. Grows very well in San Francisco, and I personally think this is a plant we should be looking very seriously at as a major crop for our
So
city.
if somebody just wanted to put it in their garden in Burlingame or
Yeah.
San Mateo, they could just stick it in there?
Absolutely.
Really?
Each one of these plants is a perennial, so you can dig it up when you need it. You can leave it in for a year and harvest it. You plant in the spring, harvest in the fall, or you can let it go 2 years. You can even let it go more if you don't need to harvest it. When you dig it up, you'll get about 8 to 12 of these large storage tubers. That's the ones we eat. So you'll get about 20, maybe 30 pounds at times off of one plant. And then around those storage tubes, right near the surface, they'll have all these like bulblets that we call the propagation tubers. These are not the ones we eat. They look a lot more like a sunchoke or a Jerusalem artichoke. And you just simply replant those. You'll get 30, 40, 50 new plants off of one plant when you harvest it. So it's very easy to grow, loves so many different conditions, amazing yield from this plant.
Nice. Talk a little bit, if you would, now about the soil. Are you replenishing all the soil in your garden, or just parts of the soil?
Yeah, there's a good angle for that. Yeah, if you see me around all this stuff, it'd be kind of interesting. All these rocks around me and things. This stuff here. So when we came to this garden here in San Francisco, well, it wasn't a garden at all. It was a bare lot, 5,000 square feet, which is considered a double building lot. So you could build 2 houses. It's right here on the corner of 18th and Rhode Island in the Potrero Hill neighborhood. What was growing here was a lot of grasses, some ivy. The soil was near non-existent. It was mostly sandy, some serpentine boulders protruding all throughout the site. Very thin soil in most places. We knew right away that if we wanted to grow food, that this wouldn't be a good soil to do it in. We were faced with some options. We could, of course, bring in soil from somewhere. And where does that soil come from? Is it mined from some other ecosystem, or at what cost does it come to us? Or we could build our own soil from scratch. And that's what we chose to do. We're 2 blocks away from a local Whole Foods, and we brought about 19,000 pounds of cardboard from that store up to this site, and we dropped it on the ground, laid it down as a sheet. Then a local company called Bayview Green Waste here in San Francisco brought us about 30, 40 tons of mulch. And we took that mulch and we laid that on top of the cardboard. And that is simply all there is here. That's where we're growing all this food in cardboard and mulch. So we've taken a waste material, which is otherwise on its way to be reprocessed. Cardboard probably on its way to China to be downcycled, 60% of that landfilled and 40% made back into paper products, and some of that shipped back to America. It's really a downcycling, so we're turning that into soil right here and growing a lot of food, therefore reducing our energetic debt. So immediately we don't have to pay off a lot of energy debt for our yield here at the garden.
What's energy?
So energy is sort of a permaculture coin term, embodied energy, some of the life cycle analysis kind of stuff. So when we look at any object, any artifact in our built environment, or any object that we can have or hold, it's energy, it's embodied energy, it's energy, if you will. It takes into account how it got to you, how it was manufactured, where were the materials gotten from that it was manufactured out of. Was it a mine? Was it a quarry? How were the plastics made? Were the plastics made in a plant? And how are the chemicals made for the plastics? And what about the plant itself, and how was that manufactured? What about the living conditions of the people who manufactured? And then also the other end of the spectrum is what happens to the product when it's gone. Is it dismantled? Is it recycled? Is it landfilled? What are the costs and energies involved in that process? That is energy. So any object in our environment has an energy value. It's literally very hard to assess it in detail. I think we get a lot of good indications just by using our permaculture lens to view how that thing is made.
permaculture to me is already complicated because you're asking for a very interconnected, integrated approach. That approach isn't necessarily taught in American schools.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? The integrated approach is really what it's all about. It's the interconnectedness of things that leads us to a lot of our decisions. Permaculture truly is not about, it's about the relationships. Permaculture is about the relationships of things. It's less about the elements themselves, but more about how they interrelate. It's whole systems design. It takes into account the whole system, everything within human habitat. So we want to consider the people, the place, the time, and all the factors. Soil and climate is a piece of it, but so are the communities and the resources that are local and available. All of these factors come together.
Very good. And in other projects, you might find a pool, a reservoir at the top, then that's the source for the garden. In this case, you're using just a city water supply, right? Absolutely.
We would like to catch water here, but that would be at the cost of space to grow food. And it is a careful balance. The urban environment and urban permaculture varies a bit. All the principles and the ethics are exactly the same as permaculture, and you can learn urban or traditional permaculture just the same and go to an urban setting or a rural setting and be able to apply that. But the strategies we use in the urban permaculture look a bit different. For example, the sheet mulching. You wouldn't do sheet mulching on 10 acres. It's impractical. Where do you get the cardboard? Same with water harvesting. In the rural setting or in broadacre permaculture, a homestead might be independent in some ways, off the grid. It might provide its own water and its own electricity and all of these things. In the urban setting, especially a very dense urban setting like San Francisco, does it make sense for each household to be an island unto itself? We find that it's probably not the case. And so the best use for each piece of land is considered. Least change for greatest effect. And maybe we'll catch enough water over in some other location, to make up for the fact that we're just focusing on food production here.
Okay.
That being said, what we do have an abundance of in San Francisco is actually just gray water. With each household doing laundry and showering and all the sinks and everything like that, we could be approaching subtropical type moisture conditions in San Francisco or any city for that matter, just by simply applying all of our gray water to our gardens.
Is it possible to have those folks donate gray water to this area? Yeah,
absolutely. It's in the plan. We've been at this garden for just short of 3 years, and so we've gone from just a bare site to around 100 fruit and nut trees and lots of species of rare plants and growing a lot of food in just that time. I would consider this garden about 60% done. And even though it's just 5,000 square feet, we just get denser and denser and denser. And if you take your time while you walk around here, you can spend hours in just a 5 by 5 foot area and see all sorts of things going on. So it doesn't matter how big your land is. You can do this on just 100 square feet, and you just get into the density, diversity.
Okay, very interesting. All right. So what is this shack, guys?
So you're looking here at a little shed. Originally I built this shed so that I could house my compost tea brewer. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to have a shed, well, this is permaculture. We got to stack functions, of course, so it's got to be a greenhouse too. Well, if I'm going to build a greenhouse, what kind of materials am I going to use? And so I went with a pole barn type construction, which is basically like building a deck. We plant piers into the ground. We use much less lumber than a stick frame type structure. And then we build our platform, but we let those piers go all the way up, and we attach our roof to it. Then I skinned the entire thing in old French doors with glass panels and sliding glass patio doors for the roof. It leaks a little bit here and there, and it's drafty, but then again, it's just a garden shed, and we're using old materials that were otherwise just going to waste, so I'm quite fond of it.
Okay.
What we're looking at is the Malabar Gourd, also called Victoria, or in Spanish, La Cayote, or Chilacayote. It is a perennial pumpkin. It's a very interesting plant. grows quite vigorously. We've been calling it the kudzu squash here in San Francisco. At this time of year, I know very few people that have a squash of this size. And what it does actually is it tends to take over our entire garden. And it has the ability to layer in anywhere where the roots will grow in, anywhere where one of the branches lays down. So the plant can grow and multiply and be cut away from its mother plant and propagated vegetatively. So it spreads quite aggressively. It grows a pumpkin size, or a small pumpkin about the size of a spaghetti squash. It's a little bit sweet with the white flesh. And so what we've done is we've actually created this trellis over here because we can't find any other place in the garden which it doesn't completely take over all the other plants.
Okay.
So we're hoping to just use some vertical space here and have the pumpkins hanging down from above and create a little gazebo, a little pumpkin gazebo. Really interesting plants. As part of what we do here is try to figure out what are the really interesting plants for our microclimate in San Francisco. What are the really productive, abundant, easy to grow foods that can feed a lot of people. So this is one of them that we're very excited about. And even right here at the beginning of June, it's already beginning to fruit.
Wow, nice.
And that's relatively unheard of around here. And this one is just a transplant from the mother plant on the other side of the garden, which is even doing quite more. Over at Hayes Valley Farm, there's one of these that's it's probably from one plant. It's probably covering about 500-600 square feet of ground.
Wow.
And it's just growing hundreds and hundreds of these pumpkins. I've never seen anything like it.
So if you talked about design in nature, this is a variation. You're taking a vertical strategy. Is that part of permaculture? Is that not your traditional way to do things here?
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess if we're copying a pattern, we're looking at plants that grow up in the vertical. So the seventh layer of the food forest, if you will, the vines, they would be climbing a tree. So
Okay.
this is a function stack. It's not just vertical trellis, but it's also, you can walk on the inside of it, and it'll be a shady little gazebo on a hot sunny day. And it's also keeping the plant up off the ground where we can use the rest of the garden for other things. So we're always looking for that. So, least change for greatest effect. This is local bamboo harvested by a neighbor, and we just erected it really quite simply in one day, and it's only meant to last for a year or two, and then we'll redo it.
Okay. And how would you cook the fruit? How would you like to see it cooked?
Well, the seeds have been prized for a long time as a really high protein source, and also as a medicinal. So most all of the pumpkin seeds are good for worms, or to remove worms from our bodies, and this one in particular is quite effective of that. The fruit itself is often made into a dessert, where it's kind of simmered with some milk and sugar and cinnamon and eaten that way. There's a number of different recipes, but it's usually dessert kind of.
It's like a porridge.
A little bit, yeah, with
something.
chunky pumpkin in it. Yeah, it's really not like firm like a pumpkin. I would say the texture is more of a cross between a pumpkin and a watermelon.
Ooh, delightful.
Yeah.
All right.
So what we're doing over here is a number of activities. The soil was touching up against the neighbor's house, and so there was a little bit of dry rot. So we repaired that, and we dug a trench. And in doing so, there was a lot of soil that was excavated. And along with our ethics here at the site, we don't want anything to leave, and we don't want to cause any landfilling.
Okay.
So we're actually screening out all of that soil. The site was a dumping ground for many decades, so there's glass and all sorts of rocks in there, and we're reclaiming the rocks, we're organizing them by size, and then we reuse them in different types of building projects. We're removing all the glass and debris, and we're sifting the soil in a fine a 1/4-inch sifter so that we can then use that for natural building projects like our cob bench, our cob oven, and other outdoor kitchen and teaching area stuff. And also it makes a really nice potting soil. We found that the blend here on the site's really nice, so we can just add a few amendments to that and have a nice local potting soil. Local amendments, of course. And then we're building out a pond here.
Okay.
With a lot of the materials, the rocks and stuff, we're setting in with some concrete to build an edge. And it'll be a double-layered pond. And the pond will actually, many functions of the pond will have productive plants that are rare and edible and medicinal. We'll have fish and all sorts of other things in there in life. But in general, a big part of it is so that it can clean and remediate our water. The city water here in San Francisco, some of the best in the country, but it's treated with chloramines. And chloramines are they're a disinfectant. They're meant to keep our water healthy and safe for us to drink, but it also makes it so that we can't use it for, say, brewing a compost tea. But we find that if we put that city water in the presence of life, the chloramine is actually chlorine and ammonia bonded together. And ammonia, ammonium nitrate, is then converted by the living systems in the water, and then the nitrogen is used up. When that happens, the nitrogen is used up by life. It is being broken away from the chlorine, thus breaking the bond of the chloramine, allowing the chlorine to freely gas off. So then we can use some of the pond water, 50 gallons at a time, in our compost tea brewer up on the top of the site. And then we replace that just 50 gallons at a time when we have about a 800 gallon pond here, and it'll remediate the water again for us. So we can do that once a week. We brew 150 gallon batch of compost tea per week, and that's brewed at the top of the site and then gravity fed through some pipes down through the rest of the garden.
Let's take a moment to talk about compost. Do you get compost from Whole Foods as well as cardboard, or?
No, we only brought in the cardboard during the initial build out, the first 2 months of the project. Since then, we're all on our own nutrient system here, so we're just cycling the nutrients that are on site.
Okay.
Some of us, do bring a little bit of worm castings here and there, but in general, we're just keeping things in the system. We use dynamic accumulating plants. We use worms to compost some of the garden scraps, and then we take the worm castings to make compost tea. Then we use compost tea in the garden, and we just try to keep things in cycle as much as possible.
Do you have other animals on site besides the bees, mammals or insects or anybody else?
Yeah, only what comes in on its own or was native here. When we first started the project, we found a lot of the California slender salamander, hundreds of them, and so we were very careful to create lots of habitat for them, places for them to hide underneath rocks. So there's lots of rock piles everywhere, and those rock piles give them places to hide. A really great ally for us here in San Francisco. We're known to have a lot of slug and snail problems in San Francisco because of our cool climate and overcast days. They often don't have to hide during the day to keep from drying up. And it's those slender salamanders, those little brown guys that go around and they eat all the baby slugs and snails, so they help suppress the population for us here at the garden.
Do you have butterflies that do their thing here?
Absolutely. There's so much diversity. As soon as you bring in everything that we bring in, all the different plants, because we don't grow just food, we're growing an ecosystem here. Right. And so there's all sorts of support plants and species. We get all sorts of butterflies and dragonflies and wasps and flies, and just about anything you can think of lives here. And then everything that predates on those comes in. So we have a hawk that sits on the power line and eats the mice that roam around in the mulch. We have a hummingbird right behind you. He's landing on the almond tree, it looks like.
Nice.
We have the braconid wasp, which predates on the aphids, which is on these carrot plants over here. And we have the bees, of course, and just so much life. We have pigeons that come in daily. We have the parrots, originally from the parrots of Telegraph Hill. Their flock is branched out. There's a flock here in this neighborhood, and they come by every now and then and defoliate that fig tree there and take every single fig off of it. So lots of life here, that's for sure. When it was just pretty barren before.
Yeah, no, I can see it both ways.
You want a seat? You can pull a rock over.
That's okay, I love the soil. David Cody, we're talking to David Cody, instructor, visionary, San Francisco permaculturist. Talk about how permaculture is a community building process.
Well, permaculture is, for me, it has become a community building process because it takes the many hands to do all this work. We do it because it's a passion, and I think a lot of us come to the work simply because we want to be part of a community. So it draws that sort of thing right from the start. But a lot of this work, we don't want to put a lot of money into it. We don't want to put a lot of energy into it. Not that we necessarily have huge problems with that, but we want to be careful. So we turn to people. And what we have in the urban setting, as far as permaculture goes, is two things. We have abundantly resources, so much resources, and people, hands, and minds, and eyes, and everybody here. And so we draw heavily on that resource of people and all the waste stream materials here. And so it builds community because we're being creative together, creatively responding to change and new climates and new lifestyles, and sort of reinventing ourselves here. and it's just a lot more fun with people.
What is sacred to you in general, and then what is sacred about permaculture to you?
To me, I find moments of where I'm observing things that are sacred to me, and I'll have a feeling, or I'll have a smell, or I'll hear a sound, and it seems to me that time starts to slow down and dilate outward, and I become hyper aware, and then I notice that I am in a place, and it's almost always around me somewhere, that I find to be what I consider sacred. For me, it's the complexity and the beauty of diversity, just the miracle all around us of these things that grow. And I don't just mean plants, but I mean entire ecosystems and communities, the relationships, the connections between things. And to me, I guess that is what's sacred in permaculture. It's really about the relationships. You know, from the outside, it may look like a lot of gardening and food production. And we do that stuff because we actually enjoy it, and I think it's a calling that most humans did at one point. So maybe there's a little bit of genetic memory in there about cultivating and tending things and caring for them and watching them grow, nurturing. It's one of our basic human qualities. But it's the relationships between those things. It's not the tree, but how the tree relates to everything around it, the animals and the climate and the soil and the water. How does the animal relate to the tree? And how many animals and how many plants and how much of a community does that one tree support? And how is that tree supported by its community? And it's the interrelationship, and the relationship is the deep meaning and what is sacred to me about permaculture.
I've talked to permaculturists all across the country and overseas, and I've talked about whether or not they see a need to get into politics, into the political game, to have an impact on the way things might change. As a bigger picture, what is your take on politics?
Well, first I want to say, to each their own, and I think we need people working on all fronts. And I like to say, if it's not fun, it's not sustainable. So if you find political activism or political work fun, and that's your passion, by all means, go for it. And if you don't, find your passion and go for that. Find what's fun. I find too many people have gone through environmentalist work and have hit burnout, and maybe they weren't at their point of passion and finding fun and joy in their work. So where do you find joy? That's my first recommendation. Right. For me personally, I don't find myself being too interested in politics or political activism. I don't find the work to be as joyful for me, and I couldn't keep at it for quite as long. I do believe inherently that, in and of its own course, the system that is already beginning to break down, and I want to concern myself with creating solutions that work. They may be small. It's not big. It's not for everybody. In fact, it's just for this community. But if we have a little lifeboat that works and actually floats, that we can get in when the ship does sink, then I want to do that. I like to use this analogy of the ship, as I think of our culture is really what we're at with permaculture, trying to envision a new culture for ourselves. I think of that culture as a ship. It's floating in the sea, and some of us say, the ship is sinking, we have to do something about this is terrible. And there's some people on the ship say, the ship's not sinking, it's always been taking in water, that's just part of the natural cycle of things. Right? And there are some people that are actively trying to bail out the ship. They're saying we have to keep the ship from sinking, And then there are some people who are working on the lifeboats and saying the ship's going to sink. The ship wasn't built very well. So maybe we need to build new kinds of ships, smaller ships that really work, and these lifeboats. And these lifeboats are watersheds. And the solutions will be different from watershed to watershed, because in each watershed we have different plants, people, animals, climate, all sorts of different conditions. So there won't be one blanket solution to fit a nation this size, in my opinion. And so the little lifeboats is what I choose to work on.
And so this is a primary example of localization, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's that old saying, and it still rings true for me, think globally, act locally. We have to first fix ourselves before we can go out and try to help others. And I think we're a long way from having our own selves fixed. So figuring out the solutions here would show other communities that it is possible no matter where you live. So we really focus on local solutions because that's really all we can work on.
Yeah, I got it. Interesting. So overall, do you think permaculture is a fringe movement or a revolution, or what's the scale of this thing going to be like, you think, 5 years?
It's growing quickly. It has sort of like that, exponential growth factor. One of our principles is small and slow solutions. And it was always kind of designed or incubated as a grassroots, small and slow, word of mouth, taught by individuals to individuals. And so it's spreading quite slowly. I don't think anybody's ever truly figured out a way to make a whole bunch of money with permaculture. And so because of that, the current capitalistic paradigm in our Western culture, it's not going to grow quickly in that sense. But as that starts to fall down and those solutions are no longer working, those strategies, people will be looking for new strategies. So if we have little examples of what works, showcases that they can emulate, I think it will go quite quickly. In the Western world, it may seem like permaculture is very fringe, and it's because here it's an elective. We do it for ethics, really. We're not required to, because I can still go down to the grocery store and buy what I need, and I can still turn on the tap and have clean drinking water that won't make me sick. But for a lot of people in the world, that's not true.
Right.
And people who struggle day to day to meet their needs and to stay healthy and survive, they'll try permaculture. And if it works, they'll try anything. And if it works, they'll do it every day. And it doesn't matter what you call it. And they probably don't even call it permaculture. But if it doesn't work, they'll drop it. And in those places, permaculture has really pulled through. We can just look at Cuba and see what they've done. And thanks to a lot of permaculture teachers going there when they had their problems and their collapse, they're now doing quite well.
One of the things I'm interested in is how permaculture is providing new symbols and story songs, a new folklore perhaps, even into a new mythology. Are you adding to that foundational cultural mix of things, of symbologies and songs and stuff?
Yeah, I think we are. We all, each of us has different passions. Some people evoke it in song, some people in poetry, some people in story. That little parable of the ship sinking, I made that one up, I think. And so that's my contribution.
Okay.
There's other ones that we echo, and those may evolve and change. There's stories of the Maori and the Scotch broom, or a family of Krishnas and their cows and stuff like that. There's all these little stories and parables that are anecdotes in a way. I guess a lot of times some of the myth and story comes from teachings, and you have some sort of anecdotal example of how something works, a parable, if you will, to explain a concept, and then that parable keeps being retold again and again, and then retold by those people who heard it, and then again and again. And over time, then they begin to become these established stories, and then eventually with time, myth.
Gotcha.